Tonight, we'll explore the strangest royal laws ever written, from glowing chamber pots to outlawed beards and royal cats with diplomatic immunity. So lie back and let history tuck you in. Let's begin tonight in ancient Rome. The marble streets are quiet, the oil lamps flicker low, and somewhere in the shadows of the Palatine Hill, a strange law is about to change how Romans go to the bathroom. The emperor at the time is Nero, a man of extravagance, theatrics, and unpredictable decrees. History remembers him as the ruler who may or may not have played the lyre as Rome burned. But there's another, lesser-known decree of his that's equally unforgettable, just a little more earthly. Nero, in all his imperial splendor, once banned people from urinating outdoors at night, unless they carried a light. Yes, a torch, a lantern, anything with a flame. You could relieve yourself after sundown, but only if you illuminated the act, like it was a performance at the Colosseum. This decree wasn't a joke, it was law. And for a while, it turned nighttime Rome into a very peculiar place. You see, public sanitation in ancient Rome was already a delicate balance. They had aqueducts, sewers, and public latrines, but many were far from home, and not every citizen wanted to walk 20 minutes just to use a communal toilet. So nighttime strolls into shadowy corners were a common, if unspoken, part of Roman life, until Nero decided they must be done with dignity, illuminated, regal, proper. Historians still debate his motives. Was it hygiene, vanity, a bizarre sense of theatrical order? Some believe he simply didn't want the city's gleaming white marble streets, the pride of Rome, to be stained by the silent habits of ordinary people. Others whisper that Nero, paranoid and suspicious, feared the dark. In his mind, shadows hid secrets, conspiracies, even threats to the throne. And so, even the most basic human need became entangled with imperial anxiety. The result? Roman citizens were suddenly forced to choose between embarrassment and preparedness. If nature called in the middle of the night, they would light a flame, step into the street, and answer the call like a torchbearer on parade. Imagine the scene. The moon above, a sleepy man in a toga holding a sputtering lamp, one hand on his oil lantern, the other lifting the hem of his robe. Just another obedient citizen complying with imperial law. Some tried to resist, of course. They scoffed at the law, mumbled about overreach, and tiptoed into alleyways without their torches. But Nero's city guards, the vigiles, were watching. These were Rome's night patrols, equal parts firefighters, law enforcers, and amateur detectives. They were told to catch violators, and they did. The punishments ranged from small fines to public ridicule. A few unlucky ones were made examples of, sentenced to clean streets, or paraded through town with their cloaks soaked in vinegar. But Romans being Romans, they adapted. Vendors began selling small travel-sized oil lamps designed specifically for nighttime needs. There were even scented torches marketed to nobles who wanted to relieve themselves with dignity. And naturally, poets and playwrights couldn't resist poking fun at the emperor's illuminated law. One anonymous verse scratched into a tavern wall read, "The emperor fears what's done in the dark, but nature's call waits for no spark." And like so many of Nero's whims, the decree eventually faded, overwritten by time forgotten by law. But for a strange little while in the golden age of Rome, bladders were not only regulated, they were staged. So tonight, as you tiptoe through history, know that even the mighty Roman Empire had rules about when and how you could pee. And Nero, he ruled it all, even the shadows. Let's sail now to the icy winds of 17th century Russia, to a time of towering palaces, church bells echoing across snowy fields, and one man determined to drag an entire nation into the modern age, whether it wanted to go or not. His name was Peter the Great, and he had a vision. Russia, he believed, was too traditional, too slow, too stuck in its ways. The rest of Europe, France, Germany, England, had powdered wigs, naval fleets, and perfectly trimmed jaws. And Russia? Russia still wore long robes and even longer beards. To Peter, that wasn't just a style problem. It was a symbol of backwardness. And symbols, he decided, could be taxed. In 1698, with the full force of imperial will, Peter issued one of the strangest royal decrees in European history: a beard tax. Yes, if you were a man and you wished to keep your beard, you had to pay for the privilege. The policy was immediate. Men were stopped in the street, their chins inspected. No beard token, no proof of payment. Out came the scissors, or worse, the razors. Peter himself would often carry golden shears and trim the beards of noblemen at court. He did it with ceremony, with flourish, sometimes even with a grin. To him it was progress. To his subjects, it was humiliating. For many Russians, the beard was not just facial hair, it was sacred. The Orthodox Church taught that beards were a divine gift, a symbol of piety and manhood. To shave was to defy God. To trim one's beard was to erase one's dignity. But Peter was unmoved. He offered a compromise of sorts. If you paid the beard tax, you would be issued a special medallion, a coin-sized badge made of copper, stamped with the Russian eagle on one side, and the words, "The beard is a superfluous burden." These tokens became precious. Men clutched them like relics, keeping them close to their hearts. They were shown to guards, worn around the neck, and passed down like heirlooms. The tax applied to nearly everyone: nobles, merchants, townsfolk. Only peasants and clergy were sometimes exempt, and even then, it depended on the season and the region. Barbershops popped up across the empire. Some doubled as tax offices. Others offered beard storage, tiny wooden boxes where faithful Russians could store their clippings, in case they needed them for resurrection. There were protests, of course, quiet rebellions, whispered sermons, but Peter had spies in every city, and defiance came at a price. Still, in time the beard tax worked, or at least it changed things. Russian nobility began to resemble the courts of Paris and Vienna. Clean-shaven men appeared in powdered wigs and embroidered coats. The look of the empire shifted, not from within, but from the top down. And yet, the countryside resisted. In rural villages, beards remained thick, proud, and defiantly untrimmed. The tokens, when they did appear, were worn like badges of sorrow. Some say the beard tax was more than a vanity law. It was Peter's way of rewriting identity, of controlling not just what people did, but who they thought they were. By shaving the face, he was shaping the future. And that, in its own way, may be the most bizarre part of all. So tonight, as you lay still and drift further into sleep, picture the snowy streets of Moscow, the glint of a copper token, and a czar with golden scissors, redefining his empire, one whisker at a time. Now, let us tiptoe across the misty moors of Tudor England, where the air is heavy with intrigue, the court smells of rosewater and parchment, and Queen Elizabeth I sits upon her throne, cloaked in velvet, crowned in fire gold hair, watching, always watching. The Virgin Queen, as history would name her, ruled with unmatched intelligence, strategy, and a sharp tongue wrapped in silk. But behind the pearls and pageantry, she was also a master of subtle power. And tonight's strange decree begins with a simple accessory, the glove. In Elizabeth's court, gloves were not merely worn, they were messages, a symbol of status, of favor, of silent, seductive politics. Made from soft kid leather embroidered in silver thread, sometimes perfumed with crushed violets, a single glove could be a declaration of alliance or ambition. Courtiers began to gift them to the Queen, dozens, hundreds, gloves stitched with poetry, gloves crusted in tiny pearls, gloves folded with secret notes hidden in the lining, each one a quiet attempt to curry favor, to rise just a little closer to the Queen's gaze. But Elizabeth was no fool. She understood the game. And so, with a flick of her ink-dipped quill, she issued a decree. No one may gift Her Majesty gloves, unless she herself has asked for them. Just like that, the fashion of flattery was outlawed. The glove ban might seem dainty, even charming, but beneath it was a shrewd understanding of courtly power. Elizabeth's court was a battlefield dressed in brocade. Each gesture, each gift was a maneuver, and she, the monarch in the middle, controlled the rules. To allow such offerings was to open herself to influence. But to ban them? That was a queen's way of reminding her court, you may admire me, but you do not control me. The decree sent ripples through noble houses. Glove makers who had once boomed from royal fashion found their shops quieter. Courtiers grew cautious, wondering what other gestures might be misinterpreted. And the Queen. She continued to wear gloves in public, removing them slowly, gracefully, sometimes even slapping them gently against her palm while addressing Parliament. A subtle display of dominance, a whispered reminder, I am untouchable. Over time, gloves became her symbol. She used them to send messages of her own. On the rare occasion she did accept a pair, it was considered the highest of honors, a sign that the recipient had truly earned her trust. Even today, some of those gloves still exist, tucked away in museum cases, soft with age, faded in color, but still radiating the quiet, calculated elegance of the woman who once wore them. So as you drift into the softer edges of sleep, imagine that candlelit court, a queen in a ruff of lace, and a single glove lying untouched, a symbol, a silence, a rule. Because in Elizabeth's England, power wore perfume, and it spoke without ever raising its voice. Now let's journey east. To the imperial heart of 14th century China, to a world of sweeping silk, ink-brushed edicts, and a palace so vast it echoed with silence. This is the beginning of the Ming dynasty, and on the dragon throne sits its founder, Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, a man of humble beginnings, ruthless power, and one of the most unusual royal decrees in sleep history. Among his many rules, and there were many, was one so oddly specific that even palace servants whispered about it in disbelief. It was simply this: no one, especially guards, was allowed to stand still. Stillness, he believed, was dangerous. It invited laziness. It suggested sleepiness. And worst of all, it might disguise disloyalty. Zhu had risen from poverty. He had seen betrayal firsthand. He trusted very few, and silence made him uneasy. So he passed a decree. The palace guards, those standing along the jade corridors and beside the crimson doors, were no longer permitted to remain motionless. They were required to move constantly, even slightly, even endlessly. And so began one of the most tiring traditions in imperial security. Guards would sway, shift from foot to foot, roll their shoulders, stretch their necks, anything to show they were alert and not plotting. Some paced in slow, deliberate circles. Others invented subtle movements, rotating their hands in slow, ghost-like spirals, or rocking gently like trees in wind. To stop, to freeze, was to risk punishment. To rest was to draw suspicion. For Emperor Zhu, motion became the measure of loyalty. Stillness was an insult to his authority. Imagine it. You're a young soldier, barely 19, standing in gold-stitched armor in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Hours pass. The sun moves across the sky. Your legs ache, but you must never stop swaying, never stop proving your devotion with movement. There are stories, quiet ones, of men who collapsed from exhaustion, and others who were demoted or flogged for a moment of forgetfulness. And yet, the law endured. It spread beyond the palace. Civil officials, too, began to move when the emperor passed. A subtle bow, a tilt of the head, a rustle of robes. Stillness, once a sign of poise, was now taboo. Even statues in court gardens were said to have been subtly repositioned, tilted forward to seem as though they too were obeying. In truth, the decree was about more than posture. It was about fear. Zhu Yuanzhang had clawed his way to the throne, and he ruled with the knowledge that enemies could be anywhere, even standing quietly, in plain sight. Eventually, the next emperor softened the rule. The guards could rest again. The palace became still. But the memory of that decree lived on in court etiquette, a nervous habit of always adjusting, always moving, always watching. So as you lie still tonight, warm and safe, imagine that ancient palace where even the silence had to dance. Now let's step into the perfumed corridors of 17th century France, where candlelight flickers on silk-lined walls and secrets drift through the air like powdered sugar. Here, beneath a powdered wig and a crimson cardinal's robe, stood one of the most powerful men in French history, Cardinal Richelieu. He wasn't a king, but he might as well have been. Richelieu, chief advisor to King Louis XIII, wielded power like a silent dagger. Elegant, calculated, untouchable, he was the architect of centralized royal authority, and the unofficial king behind the king. But even a man of such brilliance had his quirks, and among his strangest was his relationship with cats. Yes, cats. Fluffy, sleek, ever-watching creatures. To Richelieu, they were more than pets. They were companions, confidants, even guardians. He reportedly kept 14 cats in his residence, each with a name, a schedule, and a specially assigned servant. Their meals were timed, their cushions fluffed, and their freedom respected. Richelieu adored them. But here's where the strange twist begins. Despite his feline affection, the cardinal issued an official ban. No cats were to be allowed inside government buildings. No paws in the Palais Royal. No purring in Parliament. No whiskers near the War Council. Why? Because Richelieu believed cats could be used as spies. You see, this was an age of espionage, where hidden letters, invisible ink, and secret signals were everyday tools of power. And Richelieu, master of all things strategic, suspected that his enemies might be slipping messages beneath collars, training cats to deliver sealed notes, or even using their presence to listen in. It might sound outlandish now, but in 17th century France, nothing was too far-fetched. Cats were already rumored to possess supernatural awareness. Witches were said to keep them as familiars, and some believed they could even smell deceit. So Richelieu, in a move both practical and paranoid, declared that cats must not enter the chambers of state. Outside, they were adored. Inside, they were threats. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some courtiers scoffed at the idea of a cat coup. Others worried more about their trousers than their treason. But Richelieu was not to be questioned, and his ban held. Guards began checking cloaks and satchels at the door, not just for weapons, but for stowaway kittens. Officials who had grown used to their furry desk companions had to adjust. One scribe famously protested by sewing a cat's paw print into the lining of his vest. A silent rebellion that no one dared to mention. Back at home, however, Richelieu's cats lived in luxury. Each had a silk-lined basket, a name chosen from Greek literature. And when the cardinal died, he left money in his will for their care, and instructions that they be treated with dignity. So there he was, the man who outlawed cats in government, but gave them more rights than most peasants. And in a way, perhaps he was right. For who better to spy on humans than the creature who always seems to be watching? So as you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the cardinal at his writing desk, a quill in hand, a cat in his lap, and a plan too brilliant to explain to anyone but his 14 furry lieutenants. Because in the strange world of royal politics, even the softest paws might leave the deepest prints. And now, the scrolls are sealed, the thrones are empty, the candles in the palace windows have all flickered out. We've wandered through royal courts and candlelit halls, where emperors taxed beards, queens banned gloves, and kings feared their own reflections. We've seen how power, even at its height, can be peculiar, how the rules of history are sometimes whispered through absurdity, through fear, or vanity, or dreams. And in those bizarre royal decrees, maybe we find something deeply human. A reminder that behind every crown was just a person, strange, hopeful, frightened, and trying to shape the world around them in their own unusual way. So as you rest now, let these echoes fade into softness. Let the marble halls grow still, and let your breath slow, like the turning of ancient pages. Thank you for listening tonight. Thank you for being part of this quiet circle of dreamers. I hope you found a little peace in the past and a little sleep in its stories. Good night, my fellow sleepless historian. Sleep well and dream of kingdoms far, far away.